Okay, hello everyone. This is Master Viktor Neustroev, and today we are going to talk about the hidden dynamics of the hanging pawns. What is hanging pawns? Well, d5 and c5 pawns for black are considered to be hanging pawns. I will explain why they got such a name a little later. But before we start, if there is anyone who joins our who joined our workshop for the first time, can you please introduce yourself? For example, can you type in the chat which country you are from and what's your ELO? It can be either federating or on chess.com or lichess. Okay, so for the most part of the class, I want you to mute your microphones. However, if you have any questions or you have any suggestions, you can unmute yourself and say it. Okay, so people are joining. I'm also recording this event as well as there is a stream on YouTube at the moment. So it should be fine. By the way, okay, so we have Hunter who is 1126. Hunter, can you remind me which country are you from? Also, Arush, can you please share your results in your tournament yesterday? How many points did you score? Okay, so United States, fine. How many games and how many points did you score? Okay, 2 and 5 of 4, which I think is a good result. Because I know that you lost to quite a strong player, Johnny. Well, Johnny is also today with us. So, Johnny, how many points did you score? Okay, so look. Okay, so Arush drew against 1900 USCF chess player, which is I think is an achievement. Okay, Johnny also scored 2 and 5. Okay. Okay, fine. Great. Let's start with our topic today. It's hanging pawns. We are going to talk about this pawn structure. I prepared several examples to discuss. And mainly we are going to talk about what plans both players should do and how they can both sharpen the position. So it's either when white has pawns on c4 and d4 or black has pawns on c5, d5, for example, in this concrete position. Well, this may appear from many different openings. For example, which openings? Like in many Queen's Gambit positions, Tarrasch Defense, for example, Nimzo-Indian Defense, Grunfeld Defense even, Catalan as well. So Catalan opening, why not? Okay. What else? What else you need to know? You need to know, or well, who can tell me when the pawns are strong and when instead they are weaknesses? What are these two different common scenarios when pawns are strong and when they are weaknesses? Okay, so generally speaking, Dan and John are correct. And David. And well, okay. So Hunter is actually right too. When Hunter said that when these pawns are passed pawns, they are strong. Well, actually, that's true. But you cannot make both pawns passed pawns in this position. It's unlikely to happen, so only one of them. But it can be either a weakness or a strong pawn. It depends on the position. Well, let me make a kind of a summary so you should understand. First of all, once these pawns are flexible, they are covering a lot of squares into the enemy territory, and that's why they prevent the white pieces, especially white minor pieces, from movements. And this is the main power of these pawns. If you advance one of these two pawns, you are likely to provide your opponent with some squares to blockade, some squares to maneuver his pieces and play probably something dangerous to your position. That's why you'd better keep them flexible. But occasionally you can advance either one or the other one to create some dynamic play. So if there are a lot of minor pieces on the board, then two pawns are more strong because they restrict the minor pieces movements. If there are only few minor pieces on the board, for example, let's say we trade these bishops, there are only two, then the pawns are more weaknesses, and black has to defend them. So remember this feature, not when they can be blockaded. When they can be blockaded, that's right. It's absolutely correct. But with fewer minor pieces on the board, they are weak. With a lot of minor pieces on the board, they are quite strong and restrict the movements of, well, in this case, the white player. So this is one important feature to remember. Let's continue. So what these pawns allow you to do? Well, you control the central squares, which I've already said. You also cover your pieces. You have chances to advance these pawns with a temper and opening your pieces. However, you should do it very accurately. So advancing such a pawn can provide you with a breakthrough, with some attack on the enemy pawn structure. You can open files or diagonals for your long reach pieces such as bishops and rooks. Well, and you can also occupy some critical squares into the enemy territory. For example, c4 allows you to get the control over the d3. Of course, when there is a light squared bishop, doing c4 makes just a very little sense. But if not, then let's say you bring the knight to d3, and this is a kind of a problem for white already. Well, and of course you can create a pass pawn and maybe take advantage of that. Or you can provoke mass exchanges and passing the game to the endgame, which is also possible, but it depends. It can be either winning or it can be losing, but usually it's drawish. And you'll see that in these games that I chose to analyze today, mainly because two strong players were playing against each other and the position had benefits for both players, most of the games ended in a draw. However, our task is to reveal this hidden dynamic. First of all, this game. So Mikhail Botvinnik was playing against Max Yuvi. What did happen? So white begins to double the pawns and add pressure on d5 with queen d2 move. What should black do? Black does almost the same thing. They bring the rook to the game too. Queen d6, rook d1, rook a d8. Bishop goes to f1. What this move is played for? Well, you see, there are a lot of minor pieces on the board, and that's why white movements are restricted. That's why in such a case, having fiancetta is preferable. Exactly. So there is a fiancetta on the king side, so the bishop should stay there. That would add extra pressure on the pawn on c5, limiting the opportunities of black. For example, bishop f6. Well, bishop f6 is actually a strategic mistake because it decreases the number of minor pieces, but well, still, it's something that we should pay attention to. Okay, so those of you who are watching this event on YouTube, if you want, you can join our Zoom session. Please let me know if you are interested in it. Okay, So what happened? Queen h6. They are trying to put some pressure. g3 was played, and bishop c8, trying to bring the bishop to a better position, probably to g4. And in this position, well, white can play this move, after which the bishops can be exchanged, for example. I don't know if it allows white to, well, it allows black to improve, but a complex of light squares is weakened. So here white decides just to trade the knight. Knight takes e5, bishop takes e5. Bishop g4, bishop a2. So queen h5, there was a trade, and they could take with the queen. And what now? So with only bishops on the board, and these are bishops of the same color, what would you say about this position? Are c5, d5 weak, or instead they are quite strong? According to what I see at the moment, there is no way to progress, neither c4 nor d4. Actually, I think they are more weak pawns rather than strong, because, well, for example, after queen a5, how do you defend all that stuff? With rook d7, probably. But it's a temporary defense. So you have to keep your queen there defending d7. Moreover, there will be some counter strikes like e4. But in this exact position, black has active plan. He can try h5, h4, weakening the pawn on g3, and then if they chase the bishop away after bishop d6, there can be some sacrifices, which would be quite unpleasant. So in the game, it was queen e5. And Max Huey was thinking about a draw in this position. That's why he decided to have bishops of the opposite color left on the board. Who knows what we typically should do when we play a middle game with bishops of the opposite color? So what is our common plan in such a scenario? In the endgame, if we have only bishops of opposite color, we are trying to attack pawns which are located on the squares of our bishops. But if the position is materially equal, it's likely to be a draw. But in the middle game, you do have to attack. You have to initiate the attack. And it seems that white has better chances to attack h7 rather than black to attack any of these pawns. That's why white seems to be a little better, but just a little. So queen e2, queen d6, bishop f5. So this and queen f3. Also, they need to defend the pawn on d5. If, for example, they continue with d4, it's queen e4, which is a double attack. What would you suggest for black in this position? To not lose the pawn, to not lose the bishop, or the one on h7? So there are some practical difficulties, but it's possible to solve them. Well, if you play h6, you give up the pawn on d5. So d5 is hanging at the moment. This is the biggest issue. Yes, so Dan and Carlos are absolutely correct. It's time to play Tarrasch is right too. So g6. It's time to play g6. Why? Because you cannot take on d5. You have your bishop hanging. And once the bishop goes back, then d4 works. Because this time queen e4 is only a bishop attack. So that's why queen e4 wasn't played. But which move would you suggest for white in this position? h4, h5 makes sense, but after h4 they will react with h5. What about these pawns? So do we want to take? And if we take, they are likely to take with a pawn. We can blockade it, but it's no longer a weakness because we don't have a dark square bishop to attack it. So bishop d3, c4 makes a lot of sense. I agree with you. But this probably means that the position will be simplified. So you take with a queen, they play bishop f6, you play bishop c4, and they play bishop d4. And I don't think you have enough resources to attack f7. Also f2 is a weakness. So that's why, to avoid it, e4 was played. Yes, they will do this blockade, but let's avoid trade. Let's avoid this scenario which allows black to activate their bishop and put it on d4. Okay, so black is trying to find another object of the attack. So if they can somehow do like that, then c4, it will be easier to play c4. But white can easily stop it with rook c4. And the rook is well placed, actually, because none of the enemy pieces can attack it. Queen d6. Bishop d3, rook goes to b8. So what would you suggest for white in this position? Just rook dc1, I think they can simply move the queen to a better position. Maybe queen d7 just. Rook b1, what's the purpose of rook b1? Just defending, because when you locate your rooks behind the pawn, if it's not a rook endgame, you are actually only putting your piece to a passive position. If you can, for example, defend this pawn through the side, like doing this, you keep your rook active. It's defending as well as doing something on the d file. Queen e2 with f4 e5 makes sense, I agree, but this how do you attack f7? So just rook c2. Rook c2 and bishop c4 like John suggested. Or who did suggest it? Yeah, John suggested. That's right. So rook b4, bishop c4. They try a4, but it's already protected by the bishop. So rook e2, and that was a critical moment of the game. Queen f6 was played. White is better, but should white trade the queens or not? Who can tell me? Hunter suggests to trade the rooks and then draw the game. Carlos says no. Well, probably you're playing for a win in this position. That's why you'd better keep the queens on the board, because minimizing the number of pieces here makes the game more drawish. So queen d3, and then f4, and then maybe e5. So the dark squared bishop isn't good, but it's an opposite colored bishop in game. And because of which factors are you going to win? With queens on the board, you can still succeed with attack. And we know that when we have bishops of opposite color, we should attack. And how do we attack? Well, usually with a queen. Okay, so queen f6. Well, he took on f6 and then the game ended in a draw. But what could he play instead? Queen d3. How black can improve their position? It's hard to suggest, but it seems like rook e8 is the best move suggested by the computer. Well, they could defend on f7 with rook a7, as well as they potentially can attack through the a file and maybe even invade our camp. f4, king g7, rook f2, and now you're ready to push f5 and then e5 and take and weaken the king's position. For example, rook a7, rook d to f1, a takes b3, a takes b3. Let's say they retreat with a rook. And, well, not sure if you should play f5 right away, but what can you do at least which makes your position better? E5, e5, e5. Mm, so you mean the concept of this move is that once you play e5, which I think is possible, they have to, well, how do they have to play? Because f5 is coming, and after that g takes f5 is a must, and that exposes the king and makes the f7 weakness, so they have to play this move. And probably you think that we should trade and then attack the f5. Well, we cannot do it right away because then we lose the pawn on b3, which definitely doesn't favor us. That's why here we should somehow defend on b3 and then try to attack f5. But they can also play f6 and then defend on f5 with the king. So it doesn't guarantee a win again. So well, maybe you can retreat and then consider doing bishop d3, but what then? Still f6, but this time e5 is weaker. So at least you can play h4. And now if they play h5, then you can play f5. If they don't, then you play h5 and try to weaken. You try to take and you try to then push f5. So h5, and this time the h5 is a weakness too. For example, if g5, you simply play queen e2, and how do they defend this? If queen h6, you continue with e5 and then f6. It is a disaster. Or wait a sec, can you already play f6? Yeah, I think you can, right? You can already play f6. And if bishop f6, it's e5 simply. And then you take on f7, and it seems that it's a disaster. Maybe they take with a rook. I don't think it changes anything like that. Oh, now f7 is protected. How do we play in this position? Queen f3? No, it doesn't look so good. Okay, maybe... Okay, any suggestions? No, it seems that f6 is premature. e5 first and then f6. Because if they play f6, we can invade the enemy camp. We can take and then play queen e8 if they take with a bishop. If they take with a rook, I still don't like their position. So let's say this and then that. There is also queen b8, which is a kind of a double threat. So I think queen e5 and we're winning. Anyway, that would be quite a promising attack. That's why after f5, what they have to do is, well, not this, but what else? Queen e5 maybe. But then f takes g6 and you already invade the enemy camp. And if it's not checkmate, then you are likely to win anyway, because after this queen's trade, you're already on the 7th rank. These pawns are on light squares, and the king is in the danger. So if he takes after f5, it seems to be winning, because you either have a passed pawn or you can checkmate like that, because there is no perpetual check. Your king goes to the 3rd rank and that's it. And if they play king g8, you have a discovered attack due to the bishop on c4. So it's winning. So keeping the queens on the board and attacking the enemy king would be the best strategy. But Mikhail Botvinnik didn't realize it. He traded and the game soon ended in a draw. Yes, white is still better, but because the position is simple, this advantage is very, very little. And if black doesn't make another mistake, the game just ends in a draw. Like it did happen. So they are taking f7, rook back, and the repetition. And finally, white decided that he doesn't know what to do, and they agreed to a draw. So what I want you to remember from this game, try to minimize the number of minor pieces. Doing fiancetta, even if it's an artificial fiancetta, still makes a lot of sense because it provides you other pieces with more space and allows you to attack hanging pawns directly. And if somehow you pass the game to a middle game with bishops of the opposite color, try to keep queens on the board, but initiate the attack on the enemy king. Now let's flip the board and talk about this game where José Raúl Capablanca was playing against Emmanuel Lasker. So white here continued with knight e2. This is where pawns are more a weakness rather than a power. So that's why black should play accurately. So the knight goes to a better position. Maybe he wants to attack the pawn. Maybe they wanted just to open the c file to attack the c5. That's why this knight goes to the center. Queen a3, adding pressure. So f3, queen c5, for example, is a threat. The rook has to defend. The knight goes to g3 to trade the knight on e4. Knight takes knight, h takes g3. And queen b6. So looks like black is able to defend all pawns. But white is preparing to attack d5. So h6, an escape square, knight f3. And this is where you have to think what to do. It seems that this is a very tough position to play. Because the bishop on b7 is passive. Your rooks are only defending your pawns. White is trying to attack them, and they can always, for example, quickly remaneuver and attack c5, which would provoke you to play c4. Then after knight d4, you are with a bad bishop. So, was your suggestion to play c4? You'd better type it in the chat, because every time you do it, I have to delete. So c4, well, yeah, but c4, knight d4, and look at this bishop, look at this super knight, and seems white is better. What they should do, I don't know. I probably think that they should focus, well, on the king side attack with these moves. Because on the queen side, the position is blocked. Okay, Carlos suggests d4, but d4 is a very responsible move. Carlos, can you please explain how it works? Okay, so for those of you who joined us recently, let me repeat what we are going to explore today. We are talking about hanging pawns like d5, c5 pawn formation, or when white has d4 and c4. These pawns are strong when there is a lot of minor pieces on the board, and these pawns are weak when there are only few minor pieces, for example, like it is in this position. That's why this is where you have to look for like hidden dynamics, and that's why d4 was played. So this breakthrough worked. How does it work? You have to calculate it really well. For example, yeah, you do have to trade the bishop for a knight in this exact position. Okay, so good question from Brian. Would I rather have the talent of Lasker or Capablanca? I wish I would be quite strong with positional play as Capablanca. So we don't want the knight to get on d4. Well, first of all, we don't want to sacrifice a pawn. So takes, takes, knight takes. This is what we definitely want to avoid. Moreover, I'm sure that instead of capturing with a knight, they can simply capture with a rook. Or maybe it's not a good idea. No, then bishop f3, rook takes, this. Queen takes. Yes, and after queen f3, white is almost winning. So such an endgame is winning. Well, if the pawn was on h4, or on h3, I would say white is winning. With a pawn on g3, I'm not sure because there is a chance for a perpetual check. But it seems that this extra pawn can be converted and there is no check on d1. Also, 100% white is winning. So there is a check this time, but king g2 simply. Of course. So white should be winning in this position. Two pawns will be converted to a passed pawn, and this passed pawn can be promoted with a queen, while the king is relatively safe. So this is completely winning. That's why you have to take on f3. But when you take on f3, you have to consider what happens in case of d takes c5. So what happens in case of d takes c5? If you just decide to do what? Queen c7, you just lose a pawn because they take on f3. Yes, it's rook d2. So you should sacrifice the queen, but get enough compensation. This time, there is no checkmate. If you play this move, they play g4. So my recommendation is just to play bishop g4, blocking it, and then threatening with this. Well, this pawn is a passed pawn, but it seems to be not enough because this is a threat. So, for example, if they play queen e6, you play rook c1, and I don't think they can avoid checkmate. Only at the cost of a queen sacrifice, right? Yeah, let me show you. So queen a6, rook. Where is the perpetual? For white can deliver perpetual, you mean? No, I don't think so, because there is a 5 move and it blocks the diagonal. But I also think that g6 works, because even if they take the bishop, rook h1 is still checkmate. Okay, so you can sacrifice the queen and get a winning position. D takes c5, rook d2. Yeah, rook d2, and after rook d2... Oh, by the way, what did you prepare for this scenario? When they just take on d2, you have your queen hanging, and if you take on c5, they take on f3. If you take on c5 with a queen, they first trade queens, and then they take on f3. And the queen is hanging. Yeah, so the problem is that the queen has to move, and then the bishop is captured. Pawn takes. There is a queen on e3. Okay, so you suggest rook takes c4, rook takes... Yeah, rook takes c5, actually, it means. Well, rook takes c5, but we are fine with it, so just what to play. I don't know if... Okay, just take on f3. With a pawn, because after rook c1, the king goes that way. Maybe there is some counter attack like that, but I don't think it's promising. First of all, there is a check. And then you have to defend this pawn in game, which is probably drawing in case if black plays properly. But I would prefer to have the queens on the board. Oh, I cannot. No, well, okay, queen d3 then. Queen d3, and you have to defend this unfavorable endgame. What else? If I take with the queen, it's also possible. Then king h2. Yeah, this is also playable. I don't think that white is... Well, black is definitely worse in this position. So you cannot take on c5. What to play? Look for hidden dynamics, for some tactical strikes that are not on the surface. Yes, it's queen e6. Thanks. So, threatening with a fork. And because of that, the bishop is poisoned. That's why black is winning a piece. So d takes c5 fails. That's why they have to take on f3, then rook d4. With fewer pieces on the board, it's likely to be a draw. So they can take, but then this is a passed pawn, and black is playing for a win. That's why they played this move. Rook d1, queen d1, rook d8. These pawns are weak, but there is some attack on these pawns too. Queen e2, queen d6, offering a trade. King h2, queen d5, attacking a2, and having in mind the check. For example, if now queen a6, it's a simple checkmate. That's why b3, just protecting a2, and queen f5. So again, it's not possible to take. The rook is hanging. They play g4, queen g5. Now it is possible to take, but then it's queen g4. No, then it's queen h4 and rook d1 with checkmate. So g3, an escape square for the king. Rook d6. Well, if now they take... now they cannot take, it's protected. So king g2, g6 to let the king to go to the 7th rank, queen c4, rook e6, and finally they took on c5 but lost on g4. However, if you attended my group lessons where we were talking about rook and games, by the way, at our next sessions of our group lessons that we conduct on Fridays, there will be some lessons at which we are going to cover rook and games in more details, but we quickly covered them at the previous course. So it should be a draw if you can locate your rook behind the b pawn. But this time it is a draw even in a different way, because if the king goes there, these pawns are weak. Actually, looks like king c5 was a better move, because after rook d3, the king comes there. So, for example, how do you defend it? You can defend it with this move. But then it's g4, I think. F takes, rook takes. Okay. So rook d3, then... No, this is right. Then king b6. And this pawn is more advanced, so rook g4 take there, and then white has more chances because their king is already supporting the pawns, while this king is not supporting these pawns. So white should be winning. Actually, this is what they missed. So, but this is a drawing position. So here, for example, in case of king d4, it was better just to play f5. And if the king goes to c5 this time, just king f7. How can he progress? King b4 maybe with king a5 idea, but it's too late. The pawn still exists on a6, and these two can be captured. And this king is very close to the queen square. So, but, so he delivered the check, and soon they agreed to a draw. So it looks like Capablanca didn't do well. Rook a6, rook b2, and this is a draw, guaranteed, because after a4, the rook goes behind. Fine. So here, by looking for this breakthrough like d4, black managed to get rid of his weak pawns and pass the game to an approximately equal endgame. And because of that, he was able to draw the game. Of course, in the endgame, he made a mistake, but luckily Capablanca didn't take advantage of this mistake. But the endgame was drawing anyway. So look for these tactical strikes that help you to convert your hanging pawns to a different type of a pawn structure, especially when you see that a lot of minor pieces are already exchanged and your pawns are more objects of the attack rather than pawns that restrict enemy pieces. Okay, as for the group lessons I'm talking about, yes, these group lessons are paid. I mean, these are paid classes, but they are actually cheap. So the link for you to look for more details regarding our game. So they are well, yes, it's actually one of the most affordable ways. Thanks, Brian, because if I'm not mistaken, each well, it's like $8 per hour. You pay like 129 or you pay $49 per month, but there are 4 lessons. So that's why, and each lesson is not 1 hour, it's 1 hour and 30 minutes, or even sometimes even more. So it's very affordable. And we do classes once a week. No, it's not about activating of our passive bishop only. It's about conversion of a pawn structure. For example, if the knight was on a different position, d4 would still work. So let's say the knight were on f4, d4 still works. Activating the bishop, well, yes, but it's like additional benefit that we get. It's not the main goal why we decided to play d4. Which opening this pawn structure did come from, I don't know, but there are multiple openings that may lead to such a pawn structure. For example, Queen's Gambit, Nimzo-Indian, no, usually not Nimzo-Indian, but Nimzo defense, when b6 is not, no, actually Nimzo-Indian too. So what else? Even Catalan, but this is not from Catalan because the pawn is on g2. Tarrasch Defense, Grunfeld Defense. But usually it happens from Nimzo-Indian or Tarrasch Defense or Queen's Gambit. Yeah, something to d4, of course, because the d pawn was exchanged, the b pawn captured there. There was this trade too, and this is how this pawn appeared. Fine. Let's continue with our next example. The game between Max Euwe and Alexander Alekhine. This time he was playing with black pieces. So, well, this is how it appears. Nimzo-Indian b6, g3, well, this fianchetto, bishop b7, bishop g2. So how this variation is called? It's, yes, it's Queen's Indian defense, because there is no bishop before. It's not Nimzo, it's Queen's Indian. And so Queen's Indian defense, fianchetto variation. Bishop e7, then finally d5 was played, knight e5. If you guys play this opening, try to remember these key ideas. I know that, for example, Video plays it. So I know that you prefer to play d6, to play c5, or even deliver a check on b4. But well, d5, why not? And after knight e5, which is quite aggressive, c5. And then you may play the position with hanging pawns. Because of a lot of pieces, of a lot of minor pieces on the board, these pawns are good. But here, Max Euwe was playing quite tricky. He did fianchetto both bishops, and this is actually what he should do. He should play this move. So knight d7, for example, knight goes to d3, queen c7, e3, rook f e8, and this is approximately equal position. Black has a very solid position. So still, but knight c3 was played, and this is where I want you to guess the move for black. How black should play. Rook e8. I think that rook e8 is a possible move. However, I would play a different move. Johnny says queen c7. Can you please specify why queen c7? Video suggests d4. Video, you cannot play d4. You'll blunder your bishop on b7. Knight a6, then knight c7. Well, 3 versus 3 on d5. 3 attackers versus 3 defenders. Well, knight e4, I think, is a mistake. I don't know why, but it seems so. So knight e4, and well, I think they take, then probably knight c4, bishop b2. So I don't know. Okay, so in the game, he played knight d7, and that was inaccuracy. How can you tell me why this is inaccuracy? Now, actually, let me flip the board. Look at this position as white. What hidden dynamic you can find here? You cannot take the pawn on d5, obviously, because your knight is hanging on e5. But what should you do? Defend it with bishop f4? Then I think there is a knight's trade. Is it favorable for you or not? Yeah, you can play knight c4. Look at this idea. So the bishop is hanging on b7. In case of d takes c4, it's this. Rook b8, but that was a very important bishop. So you can go there, they can take here, but then a7 is a weakness. You have a bishop pair, c5 is an object of the attack. Well, and it's also hard to find where to move the rook. Knight c4, and what knight c4 allows you to do? For example, if you play knight b6, they can play knight a5, getting rid of the defender of this. So you have to go that way, but then there is a fork, and he gets a bishop pair and then continues attacking c5 with bishop a3, for example. If you don't play knight b6, but let's say you play like rook c8, for example, they simply take the pawn on d5 for free, because with knight d7, you block the queen. That's why you could play queen c7 first and don't miss it. Now, if this, you take on e5. So knight d5, queen e5, they take on e7, you take on e7 and protect on b7. If they take on f6, you take on f6, and after this move, you can take on a1, they take on e8, you take on a2, and this looks fine. Maybe I can improve it. I think I can. Let me take on d5 first, bishop d5, and then queen e5. So it's a double attack. Now with bishop a8, it's queen a1, and black is up a piece. Okay, instead of knight c4, why not knight d5? Okay, so knight c3, knight bd7. So why not this? Because you lose here. Then you want to play knight f6. Okay, let me improve with this line. So let me take with a bishop, you take with your bishop, and then I take on e5. And now if you take, these are two minor pieces for a rook. Black is fine. Let's continue. In the game, it was knight d3 played instead. So, but if you played queen c7, you would avoid all these problems. Knight b6, defending there. So a4, a5. Bishop a3, protecting. Knight goes to b5, it's a weak square, so occupying it with a knight makes a lot of sense, but knight e4. This time, knight e4 makes sense, because then where do they put their knight? For example, bishop takes this, now they have to move, but where? Under a pin. Then there is c4. Knight f4. I think c4 can be played No, c4, you should be accurate with this move. So knight f4, for example. Bishop f6. Rook c1. What to play then? No, maybe bishop f6 is a mistake. Well, you could just play knight d5, trade pieces, and if they don't want to trade, you set your knight on b4, blocking the bishop's attack. Okay, so queen e1 was played, attacking a5. Knight goes to d7, protecting a5. Rook d1, and, well, he'd better play this move. It's logical, right? So c5 is well protected. Just bringing one knight to support the other knight, why not? But they played this move, and now the d file is overloaded, and white could take some advantage over it. Well, rook c1 probably not, because knight takes b5, knight takes b5, and then sacrifice. Yeah, but there is bishop b3 also with a temper. There is knight b5, which gets rid of one of the pieces and attacks a3. So it's premature. If you could play e4, maybe it would work. But they played knight f4, that's right. Knight b5, a takes b5, d5 requires defense. So this. And in this position, white has a tactical resource. Which they initiated in the game. Well, now e4, d4 can be played. What do you think? Well, they play. If they take the bishop, maybe you can take on f6 because it threatens a fork. So, but they play knight d5, blocking it. Because bishop g2 definitely fails. Take, and white is winning. But if knight d5, it seems to be okay. Maybe e6. 6 f6. F6 or f5? F6 probably. Yeah, looks interesting, but probably, well, I think black is fine here. White has some advantage, but it's a small, well, I don't know if rook d4 is a natural move. Takes, then bishop e7, and then there is a pin. So if queen e7, it's knight d5, or even bishop d5. Well, so white sacrifices exchange. I'm not sure if there is enough compensation, but e4, e4 is logical, but in this exact position, looks like it's not enough. So e4 should be played, but white decided to take on d5 first, and then he played e4. And black would lose if not, okay, yes, and black would lose if only he didn't find some hidden dynamics, some specific that, okay, some feature that could help him to get rid of the pin. And this feature is common for the positions with hanging pawns, especially if they attack our c5 pawn with the bishop on a3. Yeah, can you calculate c4, please? Because if you just simply play something like that, they take, you have a discovered attack, and just queen d2, and they seem to be better because of the pawn on d5. It seems to work too, you mean? Bishop f6, I mean rook e8. Yeah, maybe it's not such a big issue. So queen d2, bishop d4 maybe. Let's say rook e1. Because you cannot take on d5. You can trade first and then try to capture on d5. Can you? So bishop d5 in this position. But then it's this, this and queen a5 and queen b3. But then it's bishop c5. Oh, no, 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 the rook is hanging. So no, I cannot play that. So my idea was that in case of this, I have this, but it fails too, actually. And if rook takes, then it's this. But just the rook is hanging, so not queen a5. In this position, there should be a different move. What do you think? If bishop takes e2, discover attack free rook. Which bishop takes a2? In case of queen a5. Bishop takes f2. That's right, yeah. Free, yes, you win exchange, that's right. Good point. But after queen e1 and bishop d5, I'm sure you can play a better move. Let's find it. Bishop takes e5. Yeah, it's bishop takes c5 actually. Because if rook takes c5, it's rook d4, and there is a pin. And there is a problem with the back rank. So they are going to take and then consider queen e8 mate. So for example, if you play h6, they can just add pressure. Let's just decide how. On the one hand, I want to play queen e5, but then it's rook c1, but maybe it's okay. A takes before. Ooh, it seems to work too. Okay, queen takes, so there is a check. Not sure how good this check is. Well, maybe, yeah, there is a check, bishop f1, and let's say they play queen a8, threatening with bishop g2. No, looks like taking with the queen on b4 is premature, and if you don't take with the queen, then why do you play b4? Bishop d5, b6 followed by rook b1, queen d1. Well, queen d1 is a very strong move, exactly. Queen d1 works perfectly well. But I think that queen e5 is better. But however, let's look at this move. How they can defend it. It's actually over. Just queen d1. And rook c1 is not a possibility. In my line, rook should be considered. But then there is still a pin. So in order to exploit it, they have to bring the rook back, but then it's even bishop c4. So there is no rook c1 this time. And rook d5 is the next move. Okay. So, how did black play? He played c4, taking advantage of this attack. So that was hidden dynamic that they both, well, that white missed. How does it work? For example, if e takes d5, its bishop takes a7. Okay, when b6? Ah, you mean in that position with a pin? Okay. So c4. Well, if they take on d5, its bishop takes a3. And then black is completely fine. He has an extra bishop. If well, why is it extra piece? Because white sacrificed a knight and now he wants to win a knight for free, but because of c4 there is a possibility of trading, so bishop e7 should be played. And after bishop e7 you cannot take with a knight, it's pinned, so you take with a queen and they take on d5, but this is how they only win a piece back. So after queen e1, rook e1, just c takes b3 and you have two passed pawns. Now white has to draw the game. They played d6, traded bishops, and d7. So some kind of a counterplay, but it's okay. So how can you play here? a5, a3. A4, a3, you mean? Not sure actually, because there is rook e4 and he is going to attack one of the. I mean, you cannot play a3 because he does this, and if you support it, he trades and promotes. So doing a2 means that you lose them. And rook b5 never works. So just rook fd8 should be okay. Then king f8, for example, to cover this square. And then you can use one of your rooks, for example, already. In the game, it was g6, not a mistake. They'd better play rook d4, but they played rook a1, attacking the pawn. Rook b5, rook goes to e8, hoping to promote, but rook d5. And now d8, just rook d8. They played rook a5, this, and this endgame is slightly better for black, but because the rook is behind the pass pawn, it still ended in a draw. After that, they made a few mistakes. I mean, white made a huge mistake and could lose the game, but Alexander Alekin missed it. However, this is a draw in endgame if white plays properly. So let's take a look again at this situation. So there are two pawns, and white wants to take advantage of that, but there is c4, which usually happens when the bishop on a3 is not protected by anything. And because of this break, the new tactical opportunities appear for black, and they are able to save the game. Now let's take a look at our last example. However, before we proceed with our last example, let me the bishop on e7. Yes, I think I did. Yeah, let me show it. Just a sec. Can you please mute yourself? Okay, I did it. Okay, let me share this variation. So c4, bishop takes e7, Brian. This is what you mean. Oh no, this is what happened in the game. You mean pawn takes? Or what? No, pawn takes knight means you lose the bishop on a3 and they have two minor pieces. Okay, fine. Okay, let's continue. Let's continue with this game. Alexander Alekhine was playing against Max Euwe. This time, Alekhine was playing with white pieces. So you see it's Nimzo-Indian defense. So without b6. Queen c2, d5, take, with a queen actually, which is not common nowadays. c5, a3 provokes this capture. And then knight f3, castle c4. Now white plays with hanging pawns, d4, c4. So these are hanging pawns for white. And white has a bishop pair, which is good too. However, the bishops are a bit restricted by these pawns. b6, bishop d3, bishop goes to b7, castle, rook a c8. Well, there will be complications, so let's move the queen away. What do you think? How white should continue developing their pieces? How would you set your rooks, for example? Rook c1, rook e1. So you suggest to use the semi-open file, but not the d file. Why not the d file? Okay, then suggest rook c1, rook fd1. So it looks quite transparent. Rook c1, rook d1, and these opportunities would provide you with a pawn break, either c5 or d5. So this is the most common scenario that your opponent is likely to expect you to play. You can play one rook to e1 to try to hide your original idea. So for example, queen f4, rook a d1, rook goes there. Well, h3 was played as a prophylaxis, stops this move. Can they play e5 in this position? Definitely not, because you have more attackers than he defenders. So that's why knight a5. And the first threat appeared. What is the black's threat in this position? Well, they can take there and then capture on c4. This is what I think. What do you think about that? So yeah, bishop f3. They are going, well, if we play just a random move, let's say rook e1, they're going to take there, trade queens. and then knight c4, and they are a pawn up, and also their knights are quite good here, and your pawn structure, all pawns are isolated. So if you take with a pawn, knight c4 is not played, but look at your king, how exposed it is. How can they play in this position? This knight should be improved, so probably this, and that. Maybe, well, actually this is fine, because if bishop c1, it can be queen h4, and the knight can still occupy this position. Looks good. So this is a threat. That's why white has to defend against this threat. How? What do you think? What? Well, when they attack your pawn on c4 and they threaten to ruin your pawn structure, what move to play? Definitely knight e5, of course, knight e5. And this is where they trade pieces to make pawns weaker. Rook f1, so take. Looks like everything defended, and white's pieces are better centralized. But how white should continue? Well, rook d8 played, how white should continue in this position. G3, yeah, I think so. Well, ideally they should play with queen e2 back, then g3, and maybe this, and maybe also knight f7, queen takes e6, which is a very common strategy when the e file is semi-open, so because this is a weakness, and the queen is out from his camp, from her camp actually. Okay, bishop c1 was played. That was an accuracy. Queen goes there. Now queen e2 is played, and you cannot play g3. Rook e8, g4. Well, this could make a lot of sense. For example, this, maybe queen goes to g2, the knight goes that way. But in the game was played knight c6, which allowed white to consolidate, to defend the pawn. So, by the way, what about queen h3? What's wrong with this move? Rook d3, and after queen h4. Well, here you have a choice. I think king g2 is fine, because you threaten with rook g1 as well as this. They can try to let their knight escape, but where? Look, there is no safe square for the knight. All are protected. But even if they could, just g5 would lock the queen on the king side and allow white to trap it with rook h1. So the pawn on h3 was poisoned. Knight c6 was played. King g2, knight takes e5, d takes e5, and the problem is that the knight has no square, so they play knight h5, sacrificing the knight. That was the main mistake. I mean, trading. But which move do they have to play? Because knight f3 is a deadly threat after king g2. The queen is trapped, and they cannot move their knight due to the activity of the knight on e5. So having h6 move would allow the knight to escape to h7. But with knight c6, they simply lose, and now they have to sacrifice the knight. Well, they took a pawn on c4, at least something, but the position is technically winning. So queen f3, threatening with rook d7, they play rook f8 in advance, h6 to get rid of the double pawn, f5, hoping that probably there is a counter attack on f2, but simply queen g3, and now the queens should be exchanged, otherwise it's queen takes g7. So take, rook fc8, but with extra bishop, they shouldn't continue playing here. However, the game continues. But it's technically winning. So one trade, the king goes to f3, and now, well, it's possible to take this pawn. But instead, bishop h6 was played because now this is a deadly threat. The rook goes back. And what would you play in this position? Look at black pieces. Well, rook a7 and you can take this pawn. But maybe this pawn is not the most important pawn. King march, maybe, but what do you achieve? So let's just take one of these pawns. Alekin played this move. Well, why did he play such a move? He wanted the rook to go to b8. Well, because almost all black pieces have no move. So this, no, this, no. So the A moves, but then it's rook a4. The B moves, it's rook a5. So that's why the rook can move to d8 or b8. For example, if it goes to b8, now he spends the tempo with the king and what? b5, rook a5. If a4, then rook a4. So, but I would practically play this move because I take a pawn for free, then I can take the other pawn and it's completely winning. So this is how the game ended. Well, what you should remember from this game? Well, having the rooks there allows you to make a breakthrough and look for tactical opportunities there. But locating your rooks like that allows you to focus on the attack, which you can allow yourself if you see that this bishop may participate, this bishop, especially if there are some additional factors, for example, the enemy queen on f4, which became the object of the attack. Alekin didn't play perfectly well, but his plan was enough to allow to trap the queen, and because of that they had to sacrifice a minor piece. Okay, fine. So we are almost done for today, and just one more thing that I forgot to do. These workshops are free. However, if you would like to support, you can donate using this button. You can donate through PayPal. This is the link I'm going to send you. So I appreciate any support. Next, let me show you how it works. So you click on this button, then you enter any amount that you want to donate, then you click PayPal button, it redirects you to your PayPal account. You enter it and send money directly to my account. As for our course, improve your endgame technique, there were 2 lessons. So this is the course I was talking about, and it's not too late to join it because you are going to get the recording of all events. So we covered lesson 1, lesson 2, so there is a lot of lessons to go through left. I'm going in, to play in a tournament next week. I think there will be a webinar because on Sunday my round starts later. So I think I can get in time, but well, Just follow my announcement. If there is no announcement, there is no workshop. If there is, of course, there will be a workshop. Thank you for coming today, and hope to see you next Sunday. Bye-bye.